In this ancient game between John Cochrane and Howard Staunton back in 1842, White is castled, but the only defenders are the children, the little pawns. All the adults are off doing other things. So, it isn't surprising that Black should be able to whip up some kind of attack. And yet, with a queen, a knight, and a bishop, it isn't so simple, because the knight on g5 is under attack, and if it's traded off, well, the attack is starting to diminish. Still, Staunton looked at the position, saw a capture check, and quickly found that it led to mate in 3. The knight, if captured, as took place in the game, allows the very pretty finish rook g4 check. No choice but to take the rook, and the queen gets to h2 with a checkmate. Now, declining the offer wouldn't do any good either. After king h1, we have a capture check at f2, king moves, and then the bishop delivers the mate. A nice early example of the power of the capture check. The great Bobby Fischer certainly knew how to use a capture check, and here he uses it to demolish his opponent, Delhi, in a 1967 game. Black's position is pathetic. The only piece in the game is the queen at b4, and that can only sit safely there because the bishop on f8 defends her. So, the obvious first move to look at is removing that bishop, and that happens to be one of our favorite tactics, the capture check. Well, Black's going to have to take back with the queen, because otherwise the queen at b4 will be swept from the board. Now, it's just a matter of finding some way to bring the rook on a1 into the attack, and we should be able to finish off Black quickly. Fischer does it in the most efficient manner. The check at a4 is very annoying. Suppose the king steps to a dark square. Well, there's going to be trouble. Loses the queen. Suppose he goes to d8 instead. Well, then the rook begins the king hunt, and the dark squares will be used to finish it off. Black must defend with queen c8 here, and then you can just see those dark squares issuing an invitation which Fischer would have accepted by giving one check and then another check, and now Black would have to give up the queen and still be checkmated. So that means that Black had to play b5. Okay, now White plays a capture threat. That is a capture at e4 combined with the threat against the rook at a8. The rook came to d8. There's nothing better. At least this controls the d file. But then the queen handles the first part of the attack by herself. Once again, the black king can't step on to e7 because of a very unpleasant reality of losing the queen. On the other hand, if the king tries to go to f7, then the rook sweeps from the corner to the f-file and wins the queen. So, after the queen check, no choice but to block. But a blocked position means that the rook is pinned and there is no real coverage of the d-file. The rook slides over, threatening checkmate. Black defends, but the queen can't stay in place when she's attacked by the bishop. She runs away, but now we see a classic checkmating pattern on the back rank. This was a fairly deep combination. It took 8 moves to get to the checkmating position. but it was easy to see because it started off with a capture check and all of the moves were forcing. Vlastimil Hort and Svetozar Gligorik were both stars of the late 60s and 1970s. In this contest, with Hort playing white, Gligorik has a big attack going against White's king, but on the other hand, White's got 2 rooks and a bishop and a pawn defending. That ought to be enough. Yes, Black does have tremendous control of the dark squares on that long diagonal, but White's rooks cover all the entry points. Using our standard tactical method, you can find the move Gligorik used to win the game. That's right, the capture check. Now, all Black has left is a bishop and a queen against 2 rooks and a bishop. It looks as though the forces are equal, but queens can slide between diagonals, and here they do. And now there isn't really anything that White can do to avoid checkmate. The game finished with the bishop move followed by a check on the open line. Since the king can't move, the rook had to interpose, and it was captured with checkmate. Could White have done anything better? Let's see. If the rook slides over from the A file, then the bishop falls with check, and the usual checkmate. One final try is using the other rook, but then a back rank check leads to the same finish. World champion Anatoly Karpov is best known for his tremendous positional play, but when it comes to tactics, he's no slouch. He understands the nature of forcing moves and the usefulness of a capture check. In this position, from a game against Georgiev in 1994, Karpov has pressure at f7 and control of the e-file, but it doesn't seem that there's anything else, and as for the knights, well, they're under attack from the bishop at a8, and Black has carefully taken measures to make sure a knight doesn't go to g5 to put more fuel on the fire. Karpov, however, saw more deeply into the position, analyzed the capture check thoroughly, and decided that he'd remove that pawn at f7 and set up a powerful pin from his queen. The rook captures, otherwise the pawn is gone for nothing. And now, I'm sure to Black's great surprise, Karpov sacrificed a knight at g5 just to get the other one there. That pin on f7 is absolutely excruciating. Black's position is in great pain, and there's no way to relieve it. Sure, Georgiev defended the rook, but there are problems on the e-file as well. The black queen is under attack, and there's no danger of a capture at e8 because queen f7 check will win very quickly. So, Georgiev tried queen d6. Okay, now how to finish? Black's king is defended by almost all the pieces, and he's got 2 extra bishops. But it's not enough, because the rook at f8 is pinned, so f7 isn't defended after all. The king is forced into the corner, and now a lovely little knight fork finishes things off. There's a threat of checkmate at g7, threat against the rook at f8, and Georgiev had had enough at this point. Let's go back and take a look at this last sequence. The key to everything is the pin at f7. The infiltration of the back rank is a very usual tactic in an attack, but here it seemed as though, at first glance, it would just cost a rook. However, we've seen that that couldn't happen, and then the finishing touch. At this point, of course, White had to take a look at 3 different capture checks, 2 against the rook at f8 and 1 against g7, but unfortunately they don't lead to victory, so had to settle for the prosaic knight fork. Still, a nice fierce attack from Anatoly Karpov. The great Paul Keres loved to have his pieces in attacking position, and the wide open kingside in this game suited him just fine. His victim, a fellow named Foldsep back in 1932, seems to have enough protection for the king. The bishop on d6 is very strong, f7 is protected by the queen, and anyway, the knight on f6 is in the way. It is true that black has no development, and that, of course, gives rise to thoughts of a sacrifice. Since we have a capture check available, let's see how it turns out. Keres didn't hesitate. The queen removes that knight, and now d5 is available. A nice check forces the king to either slip sideways or retreat. Well, retreat is not really an option, because if he tries to sit at g7, there's a simple checkmate. So, goes to e6. Now what? Well, got a rook come in with a check. Blocking with the pawn is of no use at all, because the pawn would just be captured and we would have a capture checkmate. Turns out that black doesn't manage to avoid that fate. After blocking with the queen, hoping that white would be satisfied with just removing the queen, Keres captured a pawn with check, and when black blocked, captured the pawn with checkmate, because the queen at g6 is pinned. An excellent example of forcing moves, and of course another reminder not to leave your king in the center of the board, especially when you're playing a good player.